And that brings us to our regular Friday feature, our roundtable discussion on the week's top stories. We look at the continuing economic and financial turmoil around the world, new efforts to combat Taliban insurgents in Pakistan, and the new space race in Asia as India embarks on its first mission to the moon. Joining us now are Richard Haass, President of the Council on Foreign Relations, and Carla Robbins, Deputy Editorial Page Editor of the New York Times. Welcome to both of you again.
Thank you.
This really was the week that it seems that the word recession sank in both on the markets and in the minds of many people around the world. Carla, how's this going to impact foreign policy for the United States?
Well, there's nothing good going on right now. That is certainly true. On the other hand, all of the predictions of the death of American power are a little bit premature. For example, President Sarkozy of France calling for an international summit to talk about new rules. And where does he want to have it? He doesn't want to have it in Paris. He wants to have it in the United States. So people are still looking to American leadership, and President Bush, who for 8 years has rejected the idea of multilateralism, at least in his lame duck status, is willing to talk.
Richard, do you agree with that? We're not down as bad as we thought we were in the minds of many others?
We're still 1/4 of the world's output. That hasn't changed, even though overall we're obviously shrinking. But our ability to be a model, our ability to be influential is way down. I'd hate to be the next Secretary of the Treasury preaching others to do just like us.
So you're not taking that job.
I also think it's going to make a lot of the poor people in the world poorer. It's put a tremendous strain on development dollars, which are going to be in shorter supply. The one good spot, and there might be one, is when you look at countries like Iran and Venezuela, who have been the big beneficiaries of the commodity price run-up. They're going to be doing, as we used to say, the hurt dance. And it's just possible that we will see a little bit more flexibility in places like Tehran and Caracas. That might be one of the few positives.
Well, what about the next president coming to power now? How does that hamstring them as far as trying to deal with the world?
Well, the model issue is a pretty big one. I mean, you can't go around lecturing people about how to run their economies, given the disaster that we've wrought upon the rest of the world. And we're going to have less money to do good things in the world. We're printing a lot of money to solve our own problems at home. On the other hand, once again, as I said, you know, it keeps coming back to people are yearning for American leadership. They will be yearning and looking to the next president to provide it, and one hopes that the next president steps up to that.
I'm again a little bit less sanguine. I think the next president's going to be constrained. This is going to add to the mismatch between what he's going to find in his inbox. There's an unbelievable array of challenges and the resources to bring to bear. We're militarily stretched. We're also now economically stretched. And that's a bad combination for the 44th president.
Well, let's move on to the Taliban, because there was an interesting idea that is out there now. It's probably actually beyond the stage of being an idea, and that is to arm these tribal people who are opposed to the Taliban in Pakistan, give them Chinese-made weapons and have them apparently go at it after the Taliban. Is that a good idea, Richard?
It's not a bad idea, in part because the Pakistani army has been, is, and probably forever will be inadequate to the task. They're simply not oriented this way, so you've got to find some other way to fight fire with fire. So getting the locals to do it rather than having large amounts of foreigners who would not be welcome. In principle, not a bad idea. It's obviously akin to what was tried in Iraq. The problem is in practice. Right now, the Taliban have far greater capabilities than the people we're working with. Possibly over time that can even out, but in the short run, it's not going to turn things around.
Carla, this once again shows how the Kalashnikov has just revolutionized the world. Do we need more guns in that part of the world to solve the problem?
Well, then in the long run, you've got to worry about that the same way we have to worry about it in Iraq. What happens if peace ever comes? You know, how do you disarm these people? How do you bring them back in? But right now, the situation is so awful there, and it's so awful both for Pakistanis and awful their ability to Taliban, Al-Qaeda to move across the border. Anything that gets, you know, tribal people who are suffering under incredible Taliban repression to stand up and say, no, we don't want to do this. That's, you know, it's something they got to try. Is it going to succeed? I don't know.
The Pakistanis say this was their own idea. Do you believe that, Richard? It sounds very American almost.
It sounds very American almost. On the other hand, it's not the sort of thing you can do without the Pakistanis buying in. They've been reluctant to do things like this. I think they're desperate, and I think they're scared. And what's adding to it is our previous conversation, the economy. This is a country that's not only on the brink militarily, if you will, you have the Talibanization of the society, but it's also now on the brink economically. Pakistan is going to be at the head of the queue of countries lining up with the IMF to basically get some serious financial help. It's interesting, they went to Beijing, the Chinese said, sorry, we're not going to do it. They are going to be the head of a very long queue with the IMF, and one of the real challenges is for the new administration is going to be to make sure the IMF has the capacities to begin to meet what are clearly going to be extraordinary demands on it. Again, there's a mismatch there.
Well, let's try and aim higher for a brighter note here. The space program. We saw India launch a mission to the moon. I think that surprised a lot of people. We knew it was coming, but India going to the moon.
Not Indian. I mean, they're not landing on the moon.
No,
they're going to send a probe, but yes.
Right. With American help, actually. Right. But it's a rejuvenation of the space race, especially in Asia. We've seen China, we've seen Japan, and now India. We seem, as America, to be falling behind in what we thought we were winning.
Space race is not quite the way I'd put it, because it has certain connotations of the Cold War. India is a friend. We've just entered into an extraordinary new agreement with them to cooperate in the realm of nuclear sharing. China is also getting obviously more involved in space, and there you have manned space travel. I see it as the inevitable manifestation or reflection of the fact that these two Asian giants are basically succeeding in the 21st century. They are putting it together technologically. Why should space be exempt from places where we're going to see it? We see it every other place on Earth. So the idea that we're seeing it in space is not bad. What we have to make sure, particularly with China, is the United States and China don't get into a sort of competition where we begin to develop the means for each other to deny them the use of space, because that would have real military consequences. But if the Indians or the Chinese or anybody else want to get involved in space for peaceful purposes, for technological reasons, I'm relaxed.
Carla, you get the final say.
Well, Richard has been the pessimist and all along there, and I love space travel, so I'm really into the idea that people are doing it.
You're a child of Star Trek.
I am a child, right. Let's not talk about that again, yes. But on the other hand, let us not forget that the Chinese shot down one of their own weather satellites. The Americans then shot down one of its intelligence satellites. There is that potential there for a very dangerous and frightening, space race for weapons, and that's the thing that we really don't want to say.
No, Carla. Thank you very much for bringing us down to earth when talking about space. Carla Robbins and Richard Haass, thank you both. As always, very enjoyable to talk to you.
Thank you.